So welcome, everyone. The Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center's Something to Talk About program are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers memory care and is constructing assisted and independent living, now accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. For more information, you can call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's apartments on Rolling Bay today. We also would like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on the water of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality. Today, we again visit with David Harrison, the founder of the Northwest Policy Center at the University of Washington, who taught policy analysis for many years at the university's Evans School. Every month, David joins us to analyze the national political scene. So welcome, David, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. As is our custom, we'll talk about three topics that stop after each one. Reed teased him in his email. That is, we're going to talk about the debt crisis, debt limit crisis, and what's happening in the politics of that. We'll move to Donald Trump's legal problems, which are legendary and numerous. And then we'll end up a little bit with what Joe Biden is doing and thinking, which I could intuit readily. So that's what we're going to do. And welcome especially to Christina, who's come 3,000 miles for us, and who also teased us on Facebook this morning. We've got a good group, and we're very pleased that people listen to us in between and hear your comments and questions as well as mine. It was a great day on the island yesterday. Marie Glusenkamp Perez, the new congressperson from Vancouver, Washington, was on the island, and we raised $15,000 or $20,000 for her, which is necessary. That's a Trump +5 district that she won in with Jamie Herrera Butler's help, and so we should be pleased with that. She's doing a good job back there. She's extremely well spoken. When Reed teased talking about Kevin McCarthy and the budget crisis, the debt ceiling crisis, he referred to it as McCarthy playing chicken with a debt limit, and that's of course true. But it's also true that Joe Biden is too, in that they've all read the history of previous debt crises, and they're fully aware, both of them, that it's been a winner for Democrats in the past. It's the same kabuki theater each time, where Republicans get to pretend that we haven't already appropriated and spent that money, and progress is spending the money. So it's basically always the same showdown, where more than half the public thinks it's unwise, in fact, crazy, to close down the government over a debate over the debt limit, especially with regard to money that's already been spent, and where Republicans, especially if they're in the minority, want to use it as a leveraging opportunity to decrease spending. And to some extent, they did that with the big Clinton debt showdown a little bit, with some of the back and forth with Obama. So the problem with it for McCarthy, as Reed was implying, is if the government shuts down, it's a loser for him. But I want us to know that it's a little bit less of a loser, because he just passed a bill in authorizing the increase in the ceiling in the House. So the fact that he did that changes it a little bit. It's still a winner for Biden. Biden's right about that. A little less of a loser for McCarthy, because he put something on the table with a grand total of a 2-vote majority. So why would people who don't like, I'll say a little bit more about McCarthy's package. Why would Republicans who don't like the package do that? Because it's a chance to show some solidarity to the speaker. They don't have to agree with all of it. Wingers can think it's too little, moderates can think it's too, and do think it's too much. But since it's not going to be the final package, then it gives them an opportunity to be loyal to their speaker. And that's what happened. Biden was probably thinking that McCarthy might not be able to do that, but the people who fought so hard for him not to become speaker, or at least to extract from things from him while he was becoming speaker, voted with him. What's in the package? It's pretty awful. Removal of the student loan package, help that was given to the people carrying a loan debt, a removal of the climate change energy incentives that were so much a part of the last reconciliation bill, compromise package with Joe Manchin. My favorite, reducing money for the IRS. What a great idea. We got billions and billions of dollars of uncollected taxes, a huge deficit, and you're fooling around with money that goes toward people who would audit underperforming corporations. Now, who would want to do that? Who wouldn't want corporations to pay their full share? I guess Kevin McCarthy. 1% limit to 1% growth in discretionary spending. That's a hard one because Americans probably wouldn't necessarily say no to that. But if you have 5-6% inflation year after year and 1% growth, you're killing your discretionary program budgets like EPA, and some tightening of work requirements, all to get a 1-year increase that would make us have to do this all over again next year. So that's not going to happen in that detail. They're not going to, Democrats would never agree to unravel the last year of Joe's legislative accomplishments. But it will be the same kind of deal that I started describing a couple months ago. And that is Joe Biden says he needs a clean debt resolution, increasing the ceiling. By him, clean means with no accompanying conditions. We are raising the debt by X amount, the debt ceiling, which is $31 trillion. What Kevin McCarthy says is no, and the only solution between that yes and that no is both sides getting to say something. And what they will say is, Joe will say we got a clean resolution, and Kevin will say, but we have this separate action on spending that isn't separate. So Joe Biden can say it's separate, we say it's not separate. And that will end up being what will happen. The last time that happened, Congress didn't do such a good job adhering to the ceilings they created. So it's, if you're a Republican, it's not the best instrument in the world. It's what will happen, but it will take us getting closer. And we'll take, for those of you who are invested in stocks, it'll take a little 3% sudden jar to the Dow Jones Industrial Average for it to happen. Hate it when that is the result. So that's what's going to happen, and we'll still turn out, if we're Democrats, we're still the winners, because it will get down to, well, I'll close down the government tomorrow, and then they'll cut a deal, or they'll close it down for 4 days. And even though McCarthy has done something better than his predecessors in terms of positioning himself, he's still a loser 60-40 among the public, because they don't want to close down the government. And it'll be self-evident that's who's closing it down, because Biden doesn't want to close it down, and they do. So that's what's happening with this. It's pretty much the same deal we had a couple months ago, but it is new that McCarthy was able to pass the package. That doesn't mean the package will be part of the solution, the final resolution, but he did do it. And then there is a meeting next week between Grumpy Mitch McConnell, Kevin, Hakeem Jeffries, our House Minority Leader, and Schumer and Biden. And that will be all positioning. That will come out of on the White House lawn and say, by George, 3 weeks ahead of time we fix this. That's not going to happen. But it is notable that in Biden's statement, Biden said the meeting recognizes the urgency of preventing default, and quote, it also will deal with how to initiate a separate process to address the budget and fiscal year appropriations. The fact that his press secretary included that in the statement shows that we're heading toward that as a solution. No, the word separate. So as I said, Biden will say it's separate. McCarthy will say, well, you can say it's separate. It's not separate. And we will get a nice little boost for next year's elections. Questions, thoughts, concerns on this matter? The debt is 31 trillion. The Chinese own 5% of it, which is not insignificant. If you were China, it makes you a little more likely. That's in addition to Chinese investment in the United States. So if you're and Japan has quite a bit of it. So if you're those countries, it makes you very interested in how American markets and currency are doing. I saw a question somewhere. Melissa, you're muted. Melissa, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question and a comment. My comment is, I'm afraid that if we crash the ceiling and the economy suffers, it's not going to be the Republicans who suffer politically. It's going to be the Dems, because people tend to blame whoever's in the White House for the economy. So even if the Republicans are the ones who crash it, it's Biden who I'm worried will get the blame. And then my question is, defaulting is a whole lot worse than just a regular government shutdown, isn't it?
Yeah, so those are both excellent. So let's go one by one. So just lost my train. One by one, your first point. About influence on the economy. So it depends on how long the shutdown is. Right now, as you know, the Fed wants a little bit of slowing, and a shutdown would get you slowing. So it's all part of an equation. It is true if the shutdown was extended and it drove us into a recession that otherwise wouldn't have occurred, that recession will work against us next year because voters vote on the economy. Right now, we're seeing still a very strong job market. We're seeing a modest decrease in inflation. Jerome Powell signaled that this might be it on the interest rates increases. So we don't need something bad like that to happen. And it would be something that Joe would be thinking about. But as I said, it's all in a more complex equation. And now your second thought, I have to be reminded of too, which proves I shouldn't run for president.
A default will have much worse results than a typical shutdown, won't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I have heard members of the Freedom Caucus say that it's worth a government shutdown to get their spending cuts, but it's like they don't understand what defaulting will do.
Well, I think they do. I mean, as remember, this is back to the game of chicken, I think.
But it's worth the results of it. I mean, like when you have
there's not a reason.
Go ahead.
You go first.
I was just going to say, in a typical shutdown, for example, there would be no interruption in Social Security payments, whereas with a default, there would be a risk to Social Security.
So there's the only reason to shut down is because you no longer can pay your bills.
Mhm.
So the two are related, but you're right. You're not going to have default without shutting down. So they're interrelated. The
Yeah.
default is much worse. You could have, and we have had back in the Ted Cruz shutdown, we were shut down for a couple weeks without defaulting. So the shutdown comes first. The default is much worse, and both are to be avoided. Once you default, which we have not done, then you've screwed up our currency and our role in international markets for a long time. And of course, that's why Joe Biden goes out there and says that if Republicans don't watch out, they're going to make it happen. And in fact, there's a lot of Republicans that aren't with the Freedom Caucus on this. It's back to Kevin McCarthy's problem, which we helped create when we won all those seats. He just doesn't have any margins under which to operate. So he's got to make those folks happy. And he can lose votes on the other end very easily. He engineered this one, but Nancy Mace from South Carolina, a whole bunch of others are not going to be with him into default land for sure, or even into shutdown land. Other questions on the budget before we go on to legal? Yes, Kathleen.
I've heard that the Democrats in the House are trying to do a discharge petition on the debt level. I'm wondering what you think of their chances. They need 5 Republican votes.
Yeah, so because they need 5 Republican votes, they won't get it. But it's interesting. It's just one more tactic to put pressure on the moderates, of which there are not nearly as many as there used to. There might be 20 Republicans mostly from swing districts who are feeling this from people who don't want to read the things in McCarthy's package. So what Jeffrey's doing that does is put a little bit more heat on them. But if they were ever one of the 5 dischargers, they'd all get primaried and they might even get boosted from the caucus. So they won't do it, but it is a way to put pressure on them.
David, could you describe what a discharge petition is?
It's a petition that requires a vote on the House floor. So it's a way to overcome the speaker in making sure something that's considered on the House floor. So they'd get a bill that fixes the debt ceiling and get 5 people to vote for it, and that would discharge it, and then there would be a vote. It's how to pry something loose. Any other questions or thoughts? Let's go on to the law, and then we'll end up with what Joe Biden should do. I'm so disorganized today. The courts. So as we've discussed, nothing is quite so silly as somebody saying, well, now that the lower district of Manhattan has filed the Stormy Daniels charges, Trump seems to be consolidating its support. That is one of the more incalculably stupid things that commentators say. It would only be relevant if that was the only indictment Donald Trump was facing. We all knew when Quorum put it in that it was as awful as bribing people for the election is. It's nothing up against the other indictment he faces. And it's really like saying, now that David Harrison has figured out his feet are fine, he should be in good shape, even if the rest of his body is a wreck. And the rest of Trump is a wreck. It's Alba it was easier when he was president. Very hard to indict a sitting president. Ever since then, he has thrown up appeals on everything and all sorts of executive privilege claims and lawyer-client privilege claims. And one by one, courts have batted them away. including courts, appellate courts with Trump appointees sharing in the decision. And he's down to 0 with regard to his protection. A year ago, there was a court that started thinking about certain things that Trump had done and started referencing to the probability of criminal action. And of course, a lot of the arguments about removal of privilege have to do with the presence or absence of privilege if you are thought to have committed a crime. Or so that's why that was always relevant. But now that Mike Pence has testified for a day, Trump's got problems, and you're going to see all year long how those problems are evident. So we talked very little last month about E. Jean Carroll. It's still possible that Trump will lose that case. A very smart Islander said to me, and what could he be sentenced with if he loses that? Will he do some time? And I had to go back over what most of us remember, and that is this is a civil case. The reason why Trump might lose is they don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. All they have to prove is a preponderance of the evidence. And of course, it's very hard to present evidence in your defense about what you were doing on what amounts to a not certain date. Meanwhile, Trump gave an awful deposition with some clear lies in it, and the judge allowed testimony from other women who've been assaulted by Trump and allowed to access Hollywood tapes. Remember those from 2016? So, and meanwhile, Trump's not appearing in his defense and shouldn't because it'd just make it worse. But so E. Jean Carroll could win, and what she would win would be like a couple $1 million in civil damages. So Christina's saying over to all of you, you should take a look on the internet about bits of Trump's deposition. So that turns out to be quite a thing. The E. Jean Carroll thing. I want to talk to you about what's happening after that and what I think is going to be the order. I think the next thing to happen will be Jack Smith indicting Trump over the classified materials. And the reason why that's happening is Evan Corcoran, who was Trump's attorney, has now testified before the grand jury after having his lawyer-client privilege disallowed. And it's being charged that it's going to be charged that he and Trump deliberately made false statements. Robin, I didn't know the term inculpatory. It's the opposite of exculpatory. And it means you incriminated the hell out of yourself. So they're going to argue that that was an inculpatory statement and successfully argued. So they've got lots of ways that Trump slopped around with those records, and that will, in my view, come first. Then I think the second thing will become is what Fannie Willis said she would do in the summer. We don't know what particular indictments she'll bring in Fulton County, Georgia, but we think it'll be an indictment of an election fraud of Trump. And we also think there'll be some racketeering charges that include Giuliani and several other people in terms of the multiple things they did to try and field a slate of fraudulent electors, including one attempt to sneak into the legislature, the legislative building. So in both these cases, these indictments don't mean the trial will happen then. It means the trial will be scheduled. And then thirdly, also to be scheduled, a federal indictment also from Jack Smith on election fraud. Again, as I've argued, not on insurrection, but on what Trump and his hench people did nationally with regard to election fraud. And of course, this is the primary reason, even more than the insurrection itself, to question Mike Pence. So I think all three of these things by midsummer, because they're chasing a deadline too, and that is Trump wants to argue that this is all improper because he's running for office. Of course, he's either been in office or running for office for as long as, for 10 years. So it's that he's not going to be successful, but certainly the feds, Merrick Garland and Smith, would love to indict earlier now that they've basically got testimony from Mark Meadows and all these other folks. And they've been able to get their testimony. The grand juries have heard all this stuff. And so I think you'll see indictments in order, federal, then state, then federal, between midsummer, now and midsummer, and they'll all have their then a scheduled trial date, and none of them, of course, will be blocked by an appellate court. There's not an appellate court that will stop any of this from happening. The other thing that's going on then in sequencing, as many of you know, is there's a state of New York Letitia James charge on the civil side with Trump over fraudulent business practices, different from the fraudulent different business practices where Trump was not personally charged. This is the charge having to do with inflation of value in order to borrow money and deflation of value in order to pay taxes. Turns out, by and large, those are supposed to be the same number. And with some complications, but that's a $250 million civil suit, and that's already going to be scheduled for next February or March. One of the implications of all of this is it's way beyond Stormy Daniels, way, 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 way beyond. A lot of us, not me included, have wondered why Merrick Garland wasn't going faster. It's because he wanted to win. And so all this extra testimony from the higher ups is golden for him, especially, of course, with Evan Corcoran, because he will either have, I don't know what he will have said about the false affidavit, but they know that Trump had 100 files when Evan Corcoran said he didn't have any, and you don't want that to have happened to you, because it decreases, it destroys your immunity. And so what Evan Corcoran says about what Trump says he had to do will be very interesting. And I think the world is closing in on the Donald. What does this mean for Republican candidates? It means they're going to say not that Trump is guilty, obviously. They're going to say that they don't want a candidate who is distracted. So that's what DeSantis will say. We don't want we want a candidate that can look forward and run. And now Donald Trump has to be in court the whole time. And there's none of these Republicans, even maybe Chris Christie will say, or Asa Hutchinson will say he's guilty of this or that. For the most part, Nikki Haley and DeSantis won't say any such thing. So that's, in a nutshell, why Donald Trump punches DeSantis and DeSantis punches Mickey Mouse. That's it in a nutshell. Because he don't want to punch Trump because he doesn't think Trump's going to be there till November of next year, and he wants those voters. So he will take an enormous amount of crap from Trump, and does already, to avoid that outcome. What's surprising to me, and maybe to you, is it used to be, when somebody like DeSantis would go for the MAGA vote, he intended to get that vote and then dive with everything it takes toward the center, because you can't win a presidency without winning independent voters. What Trump did last time was he did the MAGA, but not the dive, which was very nice of them. This is why Biden won by 7 million votes. He'd lost, among other things, suburban Republican or independent women. And it's the same formula this time. You know, they're wrong on guns, they're wrong on abortion, they're wrong on the debt ceiling, and eventually catches up with you. I don't know if, I don't think DeSantis will get the nomination, but if he did, I don't know how he goes toward the center. Whereas if it's Nikki Haley and she's running against an 80-year-old man, she doesn't necessarily even need to run on policy, because I would hate to have the candidate who's 30 years older than the younger candidate. I remember 1960 when Jack Kennedy won, it was all about youth. And so I just think that's a bad bet for us. So that's the legal description. Questions, thoughts, and concerns? Yeah, Sheila.
Yeah, I
Famous
was just
singer.
wondering if, how this affects us on all of this law stuff and the court stuff with Trump affects us on the international scene, if at all.
You know, I don't know. I think it's amazing how many humans continue to see us as the shining beacon of democracy. And in a way we are. The other day I was at the library, there was a speaker at Iran, sorry. And there's a international democracy index where Norway is 100%. And the speaker said, where's the United States? The answer is 83, rated 83. And somebody had yelled out 30. I don't know what they're thinking. You know, we have due process. You can stand on a street corner and say the president's an idiot. I just don't know why somebody, obviously choice has hit us pretty hard, lack of, but I don't know why we're so disrespectful of our own democracy. We've had, through some challenges, an orderly transition of power for 240 years. At any rate, I think the world always thinks we're going to figure it out. I think the world thinks we'll figure this out. And I think the thing that makes the international community feel that we're from Bizarreville is not Trump. It's that we shoot each other so handily day after day with weapons that can kill 100 people in a minute. I think that's the most surprising thing about America, but I think we're still a beacon. Other questions about lawsuits? Could somebody tell me the time? I keep on looking down because I dropped my timepiece.
203.
What?
203.
Okay, we're doing well. Third topic. Unless, hey, Cynthia, Shick, what do you have to say about all this? Did you leave? Are you there? Or do you disagree with everything I've said? You're muted. You can't fight back when you're muted.
No, I'm not muted. No, I don't know that I've ever disagreed with anything you've ever said.
Little does she remember. Yeah.
I have something on my mind, but I don't think it's in your agenda, but I'm interested in the results of these trials of the insurrectionists. And maybe that's a question we can save till the end if there's time.
Okay, I'll write it down. New news today, of course, because the sedition trial had 4 guilty findings just yesterday. Okay, where's Joe Biden in all of this? As you know, Reed is watching me like a hawk, because in this setting, on tape, still preserved by Reed, is me saying that Joe Biden's not going to run, and he's not. So I'll win that bet. But so Joe Biden just announced what could happen between now and when he really has to run. Well, he could feel his age because he's older than me, and he's rickety. I don't blame him for being proud. I think he's been a good president. I don't have anything against Joe Biden at all. I think given that he only had 51 senators, I think what he's been able to accomplish has been excellent. I think for the most part, his public statements have been good. I think he shouldn't wear sunglasses unless he absolutely has to. That's not very presidential. It just bothers me. I'm against that. So at any rate, he had to do something and he's holding that space. I don't think it necessarily means he's going to run. A lot of more Democrats don't want Joe to run than the 44% of Republicans don't want Trump to run. 60% of Democrats don't want Biden to run, but that's how they respect him. They're afraid that he's going to get sick during the campaign or get elected and get sick or not get elected because he'll be 82 when he's running. So that's why that feeling is so strong. Let's think for a minute about who this advantages. This is to the advantage of 4 Democratic governors, all of whom are interested and none of whom have to run for re-election next year. This is really interesting. The meetings of the Democratic Governors Association has to be really weird because this is Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, J.P. Pritzker from Illinois, Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, and of course, Gavin Newsom from California. None of them is up next time. They all can run without resigning as governor. They can also say, I know how to run things and I know how to balance budgets because all their states require the balancing of budgets and don't need to, and the federal government is there to prime the pump. And so that's an advantage to those 4. It's a disadvantage for Sheila's beloved Mayor Pete, now Transportation Secretary Pete. And it's a disadvantage for Kamala Harris because she's locked in place. I've said before, Elizabeth Warren's out of the picture because she's got to run for re-election and she may not have done it anyway. And importantly, Amy Klobuchar's out of the picture. That is, she's getting more and more senior in Senate leadership, and she would have to give up her seat because she's up. You can't run for both things at the same time. That's why it's so significant. So what will happen?
Unless you're Ron DeSantis. Sorry.
What's that?
Nothing,
no,
I
he's
interrupted. Rude.
No, Ron DeSantis isn't up for governor next time. So he's just like Pritzker and those guys. You can run for office while you're governor, but you can't run for governor and president at the same time. So DeSantis, elected last fall, is in the same position as Whitmer, Pritzker, Newsom, and such. And where it gets tough is when both things are on the ballot simultaneously, and that's where it is a problem. So, for instance, I don't even know who it would be, a governor who's it's certainly true for Klobuchar. She has to run for Senate on the ballot in Minnesota in November of 2024. So it's a done deal for her. She would have to give that up. What's going to happen among Democrats? Well, first, what happened this last time? Do you remember that Joe Biden hadn't won all his primaries and he won in South Carolina with Adam Clammer's help? And then all of a sudden he was the candidate. That didn't happen magically. Obama called Amy Klobuchar and some of the others and got them to withdraw all at the same time. Well, Biden didn't have that. Biden didn't have that big of a lead. The reason you can do that is because we elect Democratic delegates proportionally to the vote. You're never going to have a huge lead. You're always going to be, if you're lucky, 200 votes ahead. And if there's several candidates, that won't be close to 50%. So around Super Tuesday, if Joe's not running, they'll do that again. If Joe is running, none of them will run. Nobody's going to run against him except RFK, who should change his last name from Kennedy to something else. So that's what's going to happen. So we don't have to worry about warfare unless Joe does what I've predicted, in which case they'll be polite to each other, but run in endless debates all spring and summer until Joe calls it into it, and he and Obama broker a solution. What should we be doing in the meantime? Intelligently win the debt ceiling, like we're about to win it, not by a lot, but we'll win it. And even a little helps with independent voters. Secondly, be seen doing incredibly intensive work at the border. You can see by, I think Biden, they haven't really figured out how they were going to do that at the start of the Biden service. And you can see them spending some time on it lately. So they very much do not want the end of the COVID policy to create endless stories about mobs of people crossing the border. And so that's why those 1,500 troops are being sent to new clerical duties. He needs to help Zelensky move forward. He's got a great, Democrats have an outstanding campaign issue on Zelensky because of the 60 Republicans who are Putin apologists, which is amazing. Eisenhower is rolling over in his grave. Reagan is rolling over in his grave. And Papa Bush. So it's one thing to be not want us to be in every international battle, and that's one thing. Another thing to protect Putin. It's shocking. At any rate, the reason why you don't hear Republicans criticized for it every day is because Biden's got his coalition and Mitch is in it, and so he doesn't need to rock that boat. But they certainly will next year, especially if Zelensky's as successful as we all hope he will be. And then hugely and famously, Biden's got to be everywhere on choice, as they were with the pill. There was some talk that this or that wouldn't get enforced, and the courts, the Supreme Court, letting the present policy stand was a great help to Biden, because we don't have a daily debate about what federal court ruling he is or isn't going to support. Biden reads what happened, and Wisconsin is a huge message. There could be as much of a 10% boost among independent voters for a choice candidate. And guess what we've got coming this fall? Virginia state legislature. So that's very cool. That is we can pick up major seats. It's also Louisiana, New Jersey, and Mississippi, but the one of those that counts majorly is moving toward controlling the two houses in Virginia and House and Senate in Virginia. The other thing that's happening to call your attention to on that front is there's a war right now to try and get choice on the ballot in Ohio. If we succeed, we'll win. And there were 6 ways in which choice was on the ballot last fall. We won all 6. As you know, famously, we won in Kansas. We'll win everywhere. Not every state has an initiative process, 22 or so. And there are some reasons where places you might not want to do it. What's happening in Ohio, it tells you everything you want to know about American politics right now. They're on their way to getting on the ballot. And meanwhile, the Republican legislature is trying to change in the statutes. I guess they can do this, what percentage you need for an initiative to win, which has always been 50% in Ohio, and which they're trying to change to 60%. So if they succeed in doing that, we could go out and get 56, 57% of the vote and not change state law. On the other hand, that still would be a good thing because it would rally our voters. So that's what's happening in Ohio. Meanwhile, there's a ton of possible choice ballot items for 2024, and that will help us, of course, a lot in congressional races to have choice continue to be an issue. And Republicans are helping. You go to any state legislature where they have a strong majority, and you're finding them rejecting pleas having to do with the health of the mother rape, incest, whatever they can do to be worse on this, they're keen on doing, and that's a real help. So that's
I
my
don't want-
report. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Something I've always wondered, what are the Republicans doing to themselves? Don't they realize how bad it is for their image to be coming down so hard on abortion?
Well, I think it's good news because for the most
For us it is, yeah, but I'm just curious.
No, I'm saying it's good news for America in one way, and that is say if I were in the legislature and I am not, and somebody said, David Harrison, if you vote against AR-15s, personal possession of AR-15s, you won't be reelected in Kitsap County. I would still vote for that. I mean, I just think the carnage has got to stop, and that there's no constitutional or statutory reason why somebody's got to have an AR-15. A lot of those legislators believe that abortion is wrong. So on an issue like that, where that goes to the heart of what you feel, then maybe you're willing to take the consequences. It's our job, if they're willing to take the consequences for a vote that is fundamentally evil, having to do with the choice of other people who are not them, and having to do with their intervention and the personal decision-making, really difficult medical and emotional decisions. If they choose to take that heartfelt vote, then it's our responsibility to turn them out for office. And they hand us the issue, but as I say, they for the most part, they're handing us the issue not out of political wisdom, but out of heartfelt sentiments. I won't say that without exception. Some of them are doing that because they'd get killed by their caucus if they didn't. There'd be a lot of Republicans in those legislators who are for a more reasoned position and don't have the guts to advance it. Questions, thoughts, concerns on any of these matters? We have a nice turnout today.
David,
Sheila,
I'd like to, I wonder, do you want to talk about what's happening here in Washington State for the gubernatorial?
yeah, I will. And what did Cynthia just ask me to talk about?
I'm sorry.
What else did Cynthia Shick ask me to say at the end?
I just, a few months ago, I heard an interview with a judge who had heard some cases of the seditionists.
Oh, right.
And he described his experience as, I think quite a few came in front of him and were very contrite, and it influenced the degree of his sentencing. And then he learned afterwards that they were back out on the street wearing all their uniforms and acting like assholes again. Excuse me.
Well,
That's
not a statutory violation.
No, but he admitted he really bought where they were coming from. He bought into it.
Well, see, I think, there's 1,000 people charged. So I think both would be true. I think there are probably people who say, please don't send me to jail. What was I thinking? I was swept away by a crowd. I don't know if that's a very big number. And then there are people who, after these folks that were found guilty of sedition yesterday, they said after it was over, we did this. Donald Trump, called for us to do it in the debates, stand ready or whatever he said, and we did. And so I think it varies. I think it would be both. I don't think there's any way to sort it out except in a court of law. And as you look at what the sentencing has done, it is absolutely been increased for somebody who punched out a police officer and decreased for somebody who didn't. And there's a lot of cases of simple entry that they haven't prosecuted. I think Christine do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have my hand up. I have two things to ask about the Democrats running. Number one, child labor, does that hurt or help us in terms of approaching the border? and that question to run on. And then the SCOTUS and the Supreme Court and their ethics stuff. Does that hurt us or help us?
So let me go really quickly because I have to get back to Washington politics and we're almost done. So I don't think child labor, I think we lose on the border right now just because of the visual unimpeded crossing and the visual of El Paso. So I don't think there's the details of the dilemma of immigrants is going to help us so much. SCOTUS, I think, is also an insider's issue, although there's new stuff on Clarence Thomas's grandnephew getting free college. I guess it could get to a point where Americans would care, and it's heading in that direction, but I don't see it as either of those two as significant. I think choice is, the economy is. I think there's a way to make international security and Zelensky, Putin an issue. I think that doesn't mean we should contest all the others. It just means it's hard to get. We want our niche with independence. And to me, I don't see either of those as hugely significant so far. On Washington politics, so Ferguson is in, Hillary Franz, formerly or presently of Bainbridge Island, they're both in. What Hillary's got to hope is that there will be another man in the race. Dow Constantine was thought to be a candidate and he decided not to. Maybe he had some polls. When Patty Murray beat Don Bacher years ago, she was the only woman running in a multi-man field. And it was around the time of Anita Hill, and she got boosted. She was a good state senator, but not well known. Bacher was an outstanding congressperson who ran at the wrong time. So I think she's got some doing to do. Ferguson's got $3 million that he's saved from his AG's campaign, and that's legal. He can transfer it to his account, so he's way ahead on fundraising. And he's as focused of a campaigner as I've ever met. And for 4 years of Trump, he got to sue Trump successfully for countless things, which all of us paid attention to and cheered on. So I think he's the favorite. Either would be a good governor. That's a good, there's not been some, with both Patty and Maria being senators, there hasn't been a path in Olympia or on the statewide ballot, and this is their chance. They're both distinguished, and I wish them both well, but only one can win. My guess will be Ferguson. Thoughts and concerns on these fronts? We have a good time together, I think. Rita, did you have something, or you? Yes, you're muted. You're muted.
Right. I was going to say, I saw in the paper where Christine Rolfes is maybe going to run for Kitsap County Commissioner, along with two of our council members.
I talked to her about.
I was surprised to see Christine Rolfes doing that, but you know.
I have fresh news on that. I talked to her yesterday.
Oh.
Marie Perez event. Yeah, her hat's in the ring. There's some technical issues why she would do that. One would be, of course, infinite number of commutes to Olympia rather than to Bremerton or Port Orchard, home. But there's been, I can't remember her name, but there's a council person in King County who did the same thing. It has to do with, in part, with salary and retirement benefits. Our legislative jobs, even if you're chair of Senate Ways and Means, which Christine is, are not full-time jobs, and Kitsap County Commissioner is.
Gotcha.
There, as some of you know, you have to be in the top 3 lists of precinct committee officers. So Tom Kilbane is a veteran of these procedures, and he's hoping she'll be in the top 3. And then it's up to the 2 remaining commissioners to decide, both Democrats. So Islanders who know Charlotte Garrido have been calling her on behalf of all these candidates. With regard to the two city council members, Bob
Dietz and Moriarty.
Dietz and Morwa. If you're Charlotte and it's not Christine, you might be looking for somebody from North Kitsap.
Yeah.
Reason for that is Bainbridge Island is incorporated, and that reduces the number of issues of which the county deals with us. Obviously, we have our own parks department, our own our fire department, our own police department. So that doesn't mean the county doesn't have some jurisdiction, but it's much less than it is in North Kitsap. The only incorporated area in the rest of the North Kitsap, this district, is Paulsville. Kingston's not incorporated. So if I was Charlotte, I'd say, what are my good candidates from North Kitsap? I'd rather do that than have another Bainbridge Islander in politics. But since I once ran myself and I was from Bainbridge Island, I would definitely give Christine a pass. She's been an extraordinary state senator. She wants to be a county commissioner. If I was Charlotte, I'd name her in a microsecond flash.
Okay,
And
thank you.
that isn't to say that Dietz and Clarence aren't great candidates. It's just to say that that's what I would do.
Okay.
Final thoughts, concerns? Covered a lot of material. We'll see whether Reed is right or I am right. Who's treating who to coffee is what I want to know. So Reed has already agreed when Joe Biden withdraws next April to say, David Harrison, you were right. Oh, he's not here anymore, so I can talk about it. So we'll see what happens on that. And by the time we're on, next time, maybe we'll be further along on the debt ceiling. We better be,